Good afternoon, all. This is Anushri from People Matters, and we are back with another exciting session of a webcast in partnership with Darwinbox on the topic Getting Performance Right with a New Age 360-degree performance process. In a workplace as dynamic as today, a 360-degree approach towards performance becomes critical to foster regular, healthy dialogue between managers, reportees, and teams about ongoing performance. The need of the hour is a holistic performance approach that can arrest attrition, improve performance, and spike engagement. This session today will offer mind bending insights on why and how a 360-degree performance approach is the way forward for success. To take us through the expert views, we have with us today Ashish Kumar Singh, Vice President HR at Mintra Jabong, and Himanshu Kumar, Director, Customer Success, Darwinbox. Ashish has an experience of more than 15 years spanning across various industries. An XLRI alumnus, Ashish has worked for organizations like Adobe and Unilever. He is a seasoned leader who has led multiple HR transformations in various areas like performance management, employee engagement, and recruitment. Himanshu Kumar leads customer success function at Darwinbox. He has cross-functional experience of more than 10 years, spanning across HR consulting, product development, strategy marketing, and operations. He too is an XLRI alumnus. Himanshu has worked for organizations like EY and Tata Group. So we have saved time for you to ask your questions at the end of this webcast. For those who are live, can simply post questions at any time during the session in the comment section on your right side of the screen. We'll try to respond to as many questions as time allows. Also, this time in this webcast, we are taking some poll questions during the session. I request our audience to log in on Slido, sli.do. I repeat, sli.do with the code hashtag 4030, hashtag 4030, and be ready to participate in our polling questions. So we have an exciting topic to discuss in this webcast today. So without any further delay, let me invite Ashish and Himanshu to take over. Over to you, Himanshu.
Thank you, Anushri, for the introduction. And it is a privilege, honestly, to be talking about a 360-degree performance process and approach. Um, Primarily because performance management for an HR professional, it is one of the most widely debated topics. And honestly, it is a journey for anyone to get it right in an organization. And hence, again, as I said it, it's an honor and privilege. What I'll be doing next is I'll be sharing a presentation. So just bear with me for 30 seconds. Yeah. So I would just like to start with this quote or this source of data, which says that 83% of HR professionals feel that the current way of measuring and managing performance need to be changed. This was a survey done by CV, and this pretty much summarizes where when I said that every HR professional in their journey are looking to get things right for their own organization with respect to organizational context. And while we go through this webinar today, we'll try to explore ways in which organizations can plan to ensure and realize the possible changes from yesteryear's performance management system. And to share his insights, we have Ashish here. Ashish has led and run talent management process at Adobe and Mintra and has worked with the likes of Unilever, Reckitt Benckiser, and really bringing a host of experiences from these organizational contexts. Really looking forward to learn from your experiences here, Ashish.
Thanks, Himanshu, and thanks a lot for having me.
Great. So, Ashish, just before we begin, I just wanted to understand from you if there is, through your experience, if there are a few points or a mantra that companies need to keep in mind while designing and transitioning to a new performance management process. What would that be?
While designing a performance management process, the key mantra that an organization needs to keep in mind is what are the objectives for which the organization wants to get served through the performance management. There could be objectives varying from how to drive a certain culture in the organization, or to talent development, or to differentiation. But which are the ones that the organization wants to drive is something that should be top of mind, and also to keep in mind the fact that sometimes one plain vanilla approach may not work for the entire organization. There may be areas for which a more 360-degree customized approach might be needed.
And if, I mean, especially because organization now are moving away from the yesteryear's performance management, during transition, are there any key pointers that people need to keep in mind?
Yeah, during transition, I think people need to keep in mind a few things. Any change in performance management clearly has a large impact on the culture compared to most of our HR practices. Therefore, it's very important, one, to make sure that people are taken along early. There is, in order to ensure that there is buy-in, the sooner people get involved, the better. Two, leadership buy-in needs to be absolutely there before the change management process begins. And in my view, three, very, very important to have a simple system which can actually enable that change. Behavior changes require a lot of effort. A system which can help us make that change will be very critical.
Great, great. So for every audience who has joined us, there's a poll question going live. The question is, what are the key changes brought in your organization in the past few years? It is a multi-select option. Would request all of you to respond to that on Slido. And thank you, Ashish, for that question, that response. Somewhere I completely agree with you. And one of the most important things that, again, coming from a very Darwinworks context and perspective that we have seen is many a times the transition is enabled and accelerated by the systems that people use. And that is where when we talk at, or when we even plan a vision for our product, uh, we at Darwinworks continuously work towards the goal of building a very simple, intuitive, and end-to-end world-class product, primarily which is also configurable and integrates with multiple HR systems. Because many a times what we have seen in performance is people would and like to integrate it with other systems across functions like sales, where they get data from CRM directly. So that is the objective with which we work. And again, the satisfaction that we derive at Darwinworks on our product or our performance management system being elaborate and comprehensive is when we are really able to manage multiple clients with diverse backgrounds and their performance philosophies, be it Arvind, which is a manufacturing organization, to internet space organization like Times Internet, or a IT organization like Signity, or it be a very traditional organization like Aarti Industries, to the new age organizations like Myntra, like Paytm, where there is a very different performance philosophy that operates. So yeah, when we have done all these studies, and when we have actually gone ahead and talked to people and tried to understand what are the features, or what are the parameters that define the new age performance system, we have actually come to a very interesting outcome. When we ask people how should a new age performance management system be, the first point that came out is it should be very simple and easy to understand. But while they were talking and they were telling us that it has to be simple and easy to understand, they also talked about how comprehensive it should be in terms of capturing all relevant inputs from all relevant stakeholders at regular intervals. People also have started talking about, and HR professionals across organization have started talking about eliminating ratings. But again, without ratings, and this is a CEB survey that I quote, there is a marked reduction in time investment from manager on performance. The quality of conversation has gone down. there is a perceived pay differentiation which has reduced, and even employee engagement, there has been a reduction in that. People have talked about 360-degree feedback, but most of the times, and this we actually heard in the same breath, most of the times peers and subordinates do not have a visibility on expectation from the incumbent role. And hence there is a lot of debate whether the 360-degree feedback should be taken for performance or potential. The other thing which people have been talking about is making performance conversation forward looking. But performance, as the fact remains, is always measured basis past achievements. And hence, this is where Ashish, it becomes very interesting, and we want to understand from your specific experiences where you have seen multiple organizations and organizations at different stages of growth. How does it really affect the organization? What we'll do is we'll go through a structured approach here. We'll try to understand the primary objective of performance management. We'll understand from your experience what are the common challenges you have faced during implementing or transitioning a performance management system. We'll understand again from your experience the whole 360-degree approach that you have implemented in your organization, and how do you really measure success. Any tips, tricks, or any experiences that you would like to share?
Sure. Yeah, that sounds interesting.
Okay. So Ashish, would like to start with a quote from Michelle Obama, and was quite struck by this one, where she says, "If my future were determined just by my performance on a standardized test, I wouldn't be here. I guarantee you that." And that itself describes how performance management system, as you rightly said in the beginning, has to be very contextual. So if we get into defining the primary objective of a performance management for an organization, what do you see as the primary objective? And if you can refer to certain organizations in your experiences and give certain contextual background on how they define their objective of performance management, would be very helpful.
Sure. Defining first of all, I think the objectives of a performance management varies as we see across from an organization to organization. Uh, there may be a few which are higher priority for an organization, but the following come to mind as I look at some of the organizations from my experience. One, organizations do consider one objective clearly as talent development. Now, this includes grooming your star employees. This includes coaching them, recognizing them, making them feel valuable. Any support that needs to be provided for underperformers. So clearly, one objective is that of talent development. Two, there are organizations which in particular are in a fast changing environment, business environments. In those organizations, clarifying expectations periodically, setting and reviewing objectives periodically, making sure the organization is focused on the right set of things, is also quite heard by me as one of the objectives that performance management should drive. Thirdly, several organizations consider performance management to also help build the kind of culture that they want to build in the organization, to help drive the behaviors, because there are, which is the reason why there are organizations who set up a set of competencies. They integrate, several organizations integrate the values into the PMS in terms of what they measure. And through that, they aim at creating a certain culture in the organization. Lastly, I would call upon differentiation of talent, particularly for rewards administration, as one of the objectives. Now, again, depending on a set of parameters which industry the organization is in, sometimes even depending on what type of roles, the objective of performance management may vary. In my experience, I've seen it vary across the four parameters that I've spoken of. And therefore, the organization needs to consider, all of these factors before deciding which one is its primary objective.
So Ashish, you mentioned a very interesting point on driving culture through performance management system. And can you give any example in your experience where a certain performance management system drove a certain culture in the organization, or vice versa, maybe?
Yeah, sure. So, in one of my organizations from my past experience, very tightly linked, they very tightly linked the values that the organization had defined with the performance management cycle. Um, the intention there was the organization actually was undergoing a large change in terms of the way it wanted to operate. It wanted a deeper rural push. It wanted a higher execution focus. It wanted, therefore, employees to be accountable for the targets that they take, and so on. What the organization did was it tightly coupled its core values as one of the things that it will measure employees on during the performance review cycle. Insofar as that was concerned, by the way, apart from that organization, I do see several organizations who look at culture or driving a certain behavior in the company as a thing that they look to performance management to do. Clearly, incentives and compensation are the other, and recognition are the other areas as well. But what you measure helps in driving culture too.
Okay, great. So Ashish, moving on to the next question. What are the challenges you have faced while trying to manage and run a performance management system? And the question I ask is primarily when all of us know, and we being in HR, we have heard it multiple times. Many organizations report or call out the ineffectiveness of their performance evaluation system. And this particular data point, which says that 82% of organizations reported that performance evaluation were not worth the time, which is a very strong statement in itself. So, what are the challenges you have faced while trying to manage and run a performance management system, especially as you rightly said earlier, getting a leadership buy-in, getting buy-in from the employees who are the end users and also are affected by a performance management system? What are those specific challenges that you have faced in your experience?
Yeah, so I have been in two organizations who fall in that 82% that you mentioned. There are in the way performance management was being the process was being done in yesteryears. There were a host of issues or problems that the organization or the employees or people managers brought up. So a few of those are, for example, leaders, again, going back to that 82%, a lot of leaders felt that there is too much time being spent on reviews. I will call upon one of my earlier examples, one of my earlier experiences where more than 3 months every year were spent on just doing reviews and moderations and calibrations to close the entire review process. Was it, if it was leading to a good benefit, perhaps it's okay. And that was what started getting debated. If it is not, then what is it that we should do? So clearly, too much time being spent. Employees felt that the process is too opaque or manager is biased. There was a lot of feedback that I have done my self-assessment, post which there is a big gap wherein employees don't know what is happening. There is a moderation step that is involved. And right after some time, manager comes back and gives me the feedback and ratings and so on. So they felt it is too opaque. Many employees felt the manager is biased. Employees felt demotivated as opposed to being energized after the review. right? This is something that, again, in two of my organizations, was a very consistent feedback. In fact, attrition used to go up right after the annual review. Several organizations have reported this. So should the review be energizing or demotivating? Employees feel that feedback came too late. Managers, especially in a moderated bell curve process, felt that they were not bought into the final rating or the final feedback that they were being asked to communicate. Again, several organizations have reported this. And lastly, I would say, in a fast changing environment, how to make sure that employees are focused on the right set of things. This I have talked about earlier as well. I would say these were some of the various challenges in the process of yesteryears.
So Ashish, can you also elaborate on how did you really go around solving some of these?
Yeah, I think the way to go around solving some of these is to first, let me pick up an example of one of my earlier organizations. What they did was, they actually started crowdsourcing feedback. So the problem was recognized that yes, we know this is not working for you. Uh, it was also recognized that it is taking too much time. There was an internal, uh, blog where employees as well as the HR leaders and business leaders were all present, and views were being taken, that what works for you, what doesn't work for you, right? There were a whole lot of focus group meetings that happened at leadership to determine what is it, what are the challenges. Once individually those challenges were identified, what the group sat down to think, and this was the HR team, as to what is it that we want as an objective or the outcome of the review process. For that organization, talent development was extremely important. For that organization, keeping the culture and building a certain type of culture was critically important. And therefore, in order to meet those objectives, they started to change, and therefore came to the next set and revised the performance review approach.
Okay. Ashish, you mentioned a couple of points around crowdsourcing. How did you go about crowdsourcing this across people? Did you do it across the employee set, or was it sample? And what were the questions that were asked to people?
It was like an open blog. So the way it started was that the global head of HR, started an open blog, internal in the company but visible to all employees, stating that I, in my experience, have heard employee feedback on this process. I would like to take your views on what is working, what's not working. That's the way it started. Then questions around, okay, if this is not working, would this work or that option work? Feedback about some other approaches started to be taken. I'm talking about an environment when continuous feedback or removing ratings, etc., was still not heard of as much. And it was that time when different set of ideas were being bounced by the head of HR on that blog post, and employees were just responding. It was, like I was mentioning, it also helped us in kind of starting to take people along early, but it also helped us know what the pain areas are and what is it that will work for the employees. Parallelly, what was also happening was that there were focus groups which were being run at the leadership level. Several leaders would join and discuss how they viewed the challenges and what is it that they would feel are the right things to measure, how to measure, how often to measure, and so on. So both the approaches were followed.
Mhm. So, Ashish, I'm just summarizing what you said, and you actually gave a very good way to go about solving any of the challenges on performance management system. You mentioned that the first thing that was done was defining the problem statement, and then we moved on to defining the objective or the whole case for change. So why should we bring about a change in the performance management system? Then you went about to crowdsource ideas and understand what are the best options going forward, and then finalized on a few options. And a great way to do about it, and that is all we talk about when we say a 360-degree approach. When we say a 360-degree approach, it is about listening from everyone around, hearing what are the best ways to do it, using multiple platforms, be it continuous feedback, be it multi-stakeholder feedback in a performance management system to drive performance of the individual and the organization ultimately. So the question to you, Ashish, again, when we talk about a 360-degree approach, what are the merits of using a 360-degree approach? I understand in your current organization and in your previous organization, you have implemented 360-degree approaches and you have really seen it working. So if you can call out the merits that you have seen while driving these 360-degree approach and also mention the context a bit, because we did talk about how 360 or how a way of performance management system reinforces culture. So if you can talk about the culture and context and what were the merits that you achieved while driving 360-degree approach in your organizations, that would be great.
Sure. I think clearly an organization as it is considering a change towards for a change in the performance management system, it needs to make sure that it considers a few set of factors. One, clearly, that when you look at different functions within the same organization, is the same plain vanilla approach going to work? Or they should look at 360-degree blended, customized, different types of approaches for different functions. For example, if I look at a set of roles which are very well defined, repeated set of tasks versus a role which is fairly ambiguous, undefined, requires discretion, and so on. In this defined, repeatable set of tasks, or the role which has that component uh, more on a scale, um, organizations I have seen, define PMS in a way that they are actually trying to drive a culture of efficiency. And therefore they would look at a set of MBOs, clearly defined matrices, success matrices, which are published monthly, quarterly, as opposed to the organizations where the roles are the functions where the roles are not that clearly defined. I'll role is one of those, but I've also seen organizations looking at having a slightly customized one even for senior leaders within the organization. I'll pick up one example of differences in how the organizations went about looking for this change. There was one organization in particular which had semi-annual reviews, and uh, there was obviously a lot of feedback. What they went about to finally the changed process was that they came in with a set of periodic, continuous, multiple check-ins through the course of the year, and these check-ins would not have any ratings associated. The manager would discuss what went well, what the employee needs to do better. It was more coaching led, and he will clarify their expectations for the next period, which is the next month or quarter, for the next check-in. um, uh, what the advantages that they got were, employees saw this as very, saw that the manager, the quality of conversations that they were having with the manager also went up, and overall the engagement scores post this change went up in the organization. um, but there are different blended approaches that sometimes organizations use. For example, in one of the organizations, what the organization did was it went in with multiple check-ins without ratings through the course of the year. but it still retained a full detailed annual review at the end of the year with ratings, with moderations, and obviously they had competencies values with which they were the areas that they were measuring. So that this is like a blended approach wherein you are doing continuous check-ins through the year, but also retaining the merits of the detailed annual review at the end of the year. This organization also had differences across functions. There were functions like supply chain, logistics, customer success, where the organization retained a very metric-driven, predefined timelines, wherein they were doing those detailed reviews through an MBO, predefined matrices, as opposed to the other functions wherein they move to this continuous process at the end detailed annual review. So yeah, it does require a different approach for different organizations, and even within the organization, different roles.
So what I hear you say, Ashish, primarily is uh, yeah. So what I hear you say, Ashish, primarily is there are multiple merits of a 360-degree approach. One primarily is the employee engagement, the openness in terms of conversation, and from a coaching perspective, it becomes, or development perspective, it becomes a very powerful tool. And I'm just trying to contrast because many times many organizations, as you rightly said, and you mentioned one organization where they do use both multi-stakeholder feedback, continuous feedback, and annual rating. Many a times we need to differentiate between our high performers. Many a times in the organization we have to reward people basis their performance, and at the end of the day the organization needs to drive higher performers. How do you suggest that organizations which go with, say, a continuous feedback or multi-stakeholder feedback approach really work their way around with this?
Yeah, that's a very good point. That I talked about earlier an organization which actually did remove ratings.
Mhm.
The one of the first feedback that started coming was the fact that the top performers, the better performers in the organization, started saying that I don't get reinforcement. The
Mhm.
number, the rating that I used to get at the end of it was, in a way, employees were so used to seeing it as a reinforcement that I am doing better than others. Um, to your point, yes, how do you differentiate top performers is one of the other key things as you are looking at defining a 360 approach. The organization that I was talking about, which went in with a blended approach, continuous feedback, as well as retained the detailed annual review, actually, this was the key consideration. While going with continuous feedback through the year does help in improving the quality of conversation. It also helps in, therefore, in improving the employee engagement. Differentiation or of an output from performance management which could help me differentiate employees for either rewards or for providing opportunities, that does become a challenge in a ratingless environment, which is the reason why this organization retained the one full annual review with ratings very detailed at the end of the year, and that rating then fed into the differentiation for rewards and opportunities. I think to your point about differentiation, again, this is one of the approaches that the organizations are using.
Right. So I think we have pretty much covered um, how do we tailor fit performance management system across team, function, business units as well. When you talked about the different context in which different approaches can be applied, but just wanted to hear from you, basis your experience again. and I'll not hold you for that. What would be your recommendation for the new age organization versus traditional organization? So, if you are looking at a new age organization, would you recommend a blended approach? And for a traditional organization, something different? Just wanted to understand.
That's a very good question. I think more than calling it new age or traditional, I would look at it in two ways. One, the kind of roles that there are in the organization, repeatable versus non-repeatable, which I talked about earlier. But second is also the stage where the organization is. Let me take two very extreme examples, which are hypothetical, but just to get the point across. When a startup, which is very small and starting up, typically what I've seen is that they would not focus a lot on differentiation. They would build a culture where everybody is equal, there's no hierarchy. You do not really want to differentiate or have that as an outcome. Compare that with a very large organization, where you would have variable pay structures. You do want strong differentiation of employees and so on. Now again, there is a maturity curve through which organizations go through that journey. So that's the for an organization, instead of traditional versus new age, I do think which one to focus on is actually driven based on the kind of roles, the kind of culture that you're trying to build, and the kind of stage in the growth that the organization is in. Unfortunately, I don't think there is a one answer that fits everybody.
Okay, so if I were to summarize the primary parameters on which one should decide the right approach for performance management system would be defined by, as you rightly said, the job definition or the role, whether it is repeatable, not repeatable, whether the job output is quantifiable, not quantifiable. Second is the culture that the organization wants to drive, and the third is the stage of growth. So the whole growth maturity curve for that organization would define what approach they should be taking forward in terms of performance management system.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. So just one other, and this is more directed because you have seen both the work groups in your current and the earlier organization. Have you seen any difference, Ashish, in the way performance management system either is rolled out or perceived by a millennial generation versus non-millennials?
That's a great question, actually. I do think there is a very clear difference, insofar as I have seen, in how millennials like to you know go with performance management. One, for millennials, the process, not just performance management, by the way, needs to be very simple, intuitive, easy to use, as opposed to very process heavy, right?
Mhm.
uh, Therefore, the organizations who have a large number of millennials should make sure that, and particularly, millennials who are most millennials are very tech savvy as well, to make sure that the way they do it is enabled through a very simple way, very intuitive, tech enabled kind of environment, not the paper pencil approach that we used to do earlier.
Mhm. Okay, okay. Any other trend apart from simple and they looking at technology a lot more favorably? Any, and for example, where I'm coming from is I've seen in my experience many a times they being more open to coaching, more open to feedback as compared to non-millennials. Have you also perceived the same thing, or is it different?
Uh, what I yeah I What I have also perceived is that the millennials are, what works more is, the coaching led conversations.
Mhm.
Uh, there are we have seen this the two theories about the strengths-based feedback versus development-based feedback. In my experience, I do feel that this coaching-led, strengths-based, forward-looking conversations do work a lot with millennials.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Finally, Ashish, on the whole 360-degree approach, would really like to understand from you how can we make employees embrace a comprehensive performance approach while giving their prime time to achieve their goals? Because as you rightly said, many a times getting employees involved early really matters. But how do you, over a period of time, how do you ensure that employees keep embracing the performance approach and keep giving their 100% to performance management system while also giving their prime time to achieving goals?
Yeah, I think the two three things that we've already discussed, but I'll come to a larger point after that. But we've discussed the fact that when we are embarking on this change, in order to drive ownership, any change in PMS in particular, people definitely have concerns initially, and they will have a lot of questions as well. Therefore, clearly involve them early, make them feel party to that change. Like one of the organizations we talked about, crowdsourcing, we communicate and clarify a lot after the change, for as many number of times as possible, and find a very important, a good tool, a system which can help enable that change. Sometimes I also do feel that at the time when an organization is embarking on a big change, like the PMS process, actually changing the system might help. Behavior changes do get driven with system changes very slightly faster than by just communication and adoption. Overall, though, I do think there's a mindset change that several organizations are trying in order to gain this ownership for this blended approach. Organizations are actually trying to make employees the owner of their careers, and several mechanisms through which they are trying to do this. They are saying that, okay, the check-in conversations need to be driven by you, to be set up by you. Two, they are making sure that there are learning and development platforms are available. You choose what learning you would like to have in discussion with your manager. They have made sure that, okay, the open IJP approaches are available, all opportunities are available. In discussion with your manager, you are free to decide what option you choose. And therefore, broadly, what the organizations are doing is to try to make the employee the owner of the career. And this also helps change that mindset and brings about that ownership and adoption towards the employees.
Mm-hmm. So, Ashish, when you mentioned a couple of points in terms of adoption, just wanted to understand how do you accelerate it over a period of time? So you also told that when you introduce a new system, it will help adoption to be better. But over a period of time, because we keep on seeing new performance management systems or trends coming in, and they would be prone to changes, how do you ensure that the adoption of these performance management system is accelerated? And again, I'm coming from a very personal experience. Most of the times, when again we did surveys, we found that most performance management system or the coaching or feedback, if there is a timeline to be filled, it gets filled on the last 2 days. The maximum completion happens on the last 2 days. So how do you ensure that this is more evenly spaced out throughout the year, especially when we are going with uh, initiatives like continuous feedback, we are going with multi-stakeholder feedback? How do you ensure that acceleration happens?
Yeah, I would answer the adoption thing and then come to the specific one about why all the feedback tends to happen on the last 2 days. For the adoption, I do think initially when the change is happening, it should be very clearly measured multiple times. For example, there was an organization which kept asking two very simple questions very periodically. Question one, I have had a check-in discussion with my manager in the last 1 month. Question two, the quality of the conversation that I had. Keep tracking where, which pockets, which teams, which areas, across which levels in the organization is it working well, it's not working well. Initially, it's very important that the change lands well and is adopted. Obviously, the system change and other things that we talked about are obviously very important enablers. But to your point about it always ends up happening on the last 2 days of a defined timeline, I have a very interesting example of an organization which actually said that there is no timeline. What it said was that the manager and the employee can choose to decide when they should have the check-in conversation, the primary ownership being with the employee, um, depending on what works for that function, that role, that team. For example, for somebody who is in sales, they may like to have the check-in conversations once every month at the end of the month, or once every quarter at the end of the quarter, as opposed to somebody in tech may want to do this at the end of every coding sprint, as opposed to somebody in another function may want to do it at the end of each project that they have undertaken, and so on and so forth, such that nobody is actually defining when it should happen. All that the organization is measuring is whether it's happening or has happened in the last some X period, and is therefore tracking it in that sense. So yeah.
Yeah, great example, Ashish, actually. And yes, I've heard it in certain organizations, the way this is one of the approaches that they take. And it has actually been quite successful for their context. So Ashish, I mean, again, coming to the last question of our discussion, but this is what I find most intriguing, and I've been in HR for a long period of time, but still I have never been able to come to this answer, where how do we really measure success for a particular performance approach? And I'll tell you where I'm coming from. The whole objective of performance management system is to drive the organizational performance, or one of the core objectives is to drive organizational performance. But whenever we talk about factors like employee engagement, we talk about other factors like you rightly said in the beginning, of differentiating high performers. How do we really connect organization performance, or do you think that is a utopian statement to connect performance management system, the right approach, with the success or with the organization performance?
Yeah, I clearly this has been an area which is still very hotly debated. I do think the way to do this is the following: need to define the success measures upfront before the change to PMS process is started. I have not seen a way in which, this, whether this change is successful can be directly correlated with the business performance yet, but there are indirect ways of actually correlating it. For example, there are a lot of studies which are able to directly correlate the performance management process with the employee engagement scores. And then one can argue that employee engagement scores have a direct correlation with the business performance. Uh, the other things that could also be looked at, for example, are employee feedback on the kind of the quality of conversations, apart from the employee engagement scores, or the top talent attrition. To your point about differentiating top talent, how much is the top talent attrition in the organization? Has it gone up or down post the change? That could be one of the other ways. But from a business performance impact perspective, I think there should perhaps be a study, hopefully conducted by Darwinbox, that for a set of organizations who have undergone this change in the last 5 years, what has been their pre and post business performance. Again, there are a whole host of variables as far as business performance is concerned. The CEOs could change, environment could change, and so on and so forth, but hoping they will neutralize each other. that could be one of the ways, but I don't have a direct correlation as of now with the PMS.
Great, Ashish. So it was really helpful, Ashish. And actually, um, I think in different groups, we all have discussed this topic and measuring success, as you rightly said. If I were to summarize what you're saying, we have to define it right at the beginning of a change process and then measure against that. And also, every organization has an organization context and certain philosophy with which they work around with, and it is always measured around that. We are still struggling to see a direct correlation or strike a direct correlation with business performance. So, yeah, that is all from my side, Ashish. I think it is a good time to take questions from the audience. And Anushri, over to you to take the questions from the audience that we have.
Sure. So we have a couple of questions that we have right now from the audience. So the first question is, uh, while anonymity tends to be baked into the 360-degree process to encourage participants to be frank and give fair reviews, don't you think ill-intentioned employees can anonymously slam colleagues they may not like, may want harm professionally, or may feel competitive with?
Yeah, this question comes up quite often. I do think that the managers and need to keep that into account. Let me kind of take a extreme example again, just to get the point across. The fairest assessment would be if we were able to collect 360 feedback or stakeholder feedback from everybody that employee has worked with. That could perhaps be the fairest one. Um, Now the as opposed to not taking 360 feedback, which could potentially lead to manager bias, and there have been feedback about it. It is actually a good thing that organizations are moving towards collecting more and more 360 feedback. And if there are cases where stakeholder feedback is not really relevant or actually biased, in most cases I've seen managers are able to make that out and have the maturity to actually hold it back and not kind of pass it on.
Yeah, I'll just pitch in over here, and basis my experience, there are two facts to it, as Ashish rightly said. Many a times, 360-degree feedback might not be the actual feedback in terms of any individual's performance, because a subordinate might not have a visibility of what a superior is actually doing and the reasons thereof. And that is where most of these feedback are taken with respect to the context, and managers more often than not do that differentiation in conjunction with the individual or the incumbent involved.
Sure. So we have another question which is on the same lines. So the question is, how do you rely on the data about someone's by depending on feedback coming from different people? How do you ensure that your group of raters is a perfectly representative sample of the competencies you are trying to measure?
So the question is, how do you make sure that this particular set of raters is the right set of raters for to give feedback? Actually, the way I have seen organizations handle this is the following. Uh, Organizations state that the employee must recommend or initiate, if the tool allows, seeking feedback from the set of 7-8 stakeholders that he or she has worked closest with. The manager, though, has the right to add or take feedback from more number of people apart from what the employee has sought. What this does is that it kind of manages it both ways. It helps the employee know that I have worked more closely with the following set of people, and they have been actually sought feedback from. But it also helps the manager keep an overview of the fact that the employee, there is no you scratch my back, I scratch yours happening here. So the manager keeps an overview that I can add and seek feedback from more stakeholders. That's the way I have seen this happen, and therefore the concern that is that the right set of stakeholders is actually one that the employee chooses.
Sure. So the next question is based on coach-led feedback system. So the question is, does this coach-led feedback system requires KPIs, and how can an organization maintain records of comments in a coach-led feedback?
Yeah, actually it does. I think, in terms of maintaining the records in a coaching-led kind of a conversation, um, and here, this is where I would have Himanshu come in as well after this. The system that you choose can really help. Uh, for example, in the organization, in one of my organizations, we use, like Himanshu was mentioning, we do use Darwinbox, and where what it has helped us do is it has a way in which a journal is maintained for real-time feedback. The journal also contains feedback which has come from different stakeholders. It has minutes of the check-in conversation that happened between the manager and the employee. You could record your KPIs and achievements. You could record what is expected from you in the next period, and so on and so forth. So a journal is maintained real time for people to go back and look at it at the end of the year if there's any. But I think Himanshu should add more color to this.
So, yeah, I'll try to be modest here. But yes, as Ashish very rightly said, the system has to be comprehensive enough to capture all of this. And if you look, and I'll talk about Darwinbox as a platform itself, any kind of feedback, you can give a feedback on specific KPIs, you can give feedback on competencies, you can have general questions. So many a times the manager can have certain open questions to ask from multiple people, or from, if there are coaches assigned, from the coaches. And all these can be brought together, as Ashish rightly said, in a journal format where everything is visible while you are doing a rating. And you can use all of these inputs. If you go for a ratings system, you can use these inputs to either give development inputs or do a rating and then take it forward.
Sure. So due to paucity of time, we'll be taking the last question for this webcast. And the question is, uh, I think implementation is what makes a difference if we talk about 360-degree performance evaluation. Can you share, I think the question is for you, Ashish, can you share what were those few things that you did differently in implementing the process to achieve results?
Yeah, I think we have briefly touched this earlier, but I think the following things should be definitely kept in mind while implementing this. One, any change in the performance management approach, clearly the employees will have concerns. I've seen this across organizations. Therefore, it is best to involve them very, very early on. There are different approaches we spoke about earlier. The more we involve them, more we make them feel part of the design process, the easier it is and more clearer they are about the intended changes that the organization is trying to bring about. Two, through the course of the implementation, that needs to be planned extremely, extremely well. Typically, organizations try to not do it right before. If you were in an annual review cycle, don't do it right before the annual review. Start it at the beginning of the year. Make sure communication is well explained. People understand how it will, how the PMS will be this course of the year, and therefore the system that you launch, people also get time to kind of familiarize themselves with the system. So those are some of the top things that come to mind in terms of the implementation.
I would just like to add a point over here, again, from my experience of transformation and how 360-degree approaches have really worked. There is always a fear in the mind of employees when 360-degree approaches are rolled out on the backlashes. And the way organizations have dealt with it is first rolling out a 360-degree approach, primarily directing to development and not taking those inputs for performance. And after a couple of years, when they see that yes, the system has stabilized, people are open to it, then taking it gradually towards a performance-oriented 360-degree approach really works.
Sure. So, with this question and answer session, we are going to wrap up today's webcast. We have many more questions coming in, which I would request the speakers to take offline. And thank you so much, Ashish and Himanshu, for your valuable insights. And we would also like to thank our today's webcast partner, Darwinbox. Meanwhile, to our audience, you can provide your feedback in the survey link provided in the chat section because your input matters. Stay tuned for many more such exciting sessions. That concludes today's webcast. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.